The first frost of winter arrived slowly, sneaking across the fields in silver whispers before it hardened into an unyielding white. Medieval peasants, who had lived all their lives in the shadow of harsh northern winters, watched the horizon with knowing eyes. To them, frost was not a sign of beauty, but of survival. It meant that the earth would soon harden, streams would freeze, and the cold would seep into every corner of their homes. For those living far from forests, in regions where trees were scarce and coal impossible to obtain, survival required knowledge, labor, and a fuel that few outsiders understood: peat. Peat was earth that carried fire within it. At first glance, it appeared as nothing more than a patch of wet, black mud clinging stubbornly to boots and hands. It smelled sour, damp and ancient, an odor that outsiders might have found unpleasant or repulsive. Yet beneath its unassuming exterior lay a power crucial to life in the coldest winters. The peasants of northern Europe, Scotland, Ireland, parts of Germany and Scandinavia, had long learned to read the bogs as one reads a map or the weather. To the untrained eye these bogs were treacherous, soft and waterlogged. They could swallow a person whole if misstepped. But to those who depended on peat for survival, they were treasure troves, waiting to be harvested with skill, patience, and respect. Cutting peat was an act of labor and precision. The work began in late spring or early summer, when the bogs were firm enough to stand on but not yet dried by the sun. Entire families participated. Men wielded long spades specifically designed to slice neat rectangular blocks. Women and children carried peat to drying racks or prepared tools for cutting. Every cut had to be deliberate. Too shallow, and the peat crumbled; too deep, and the bog water threatened to flood the excavation. Experienced peat cutters could read the ground beneath their feet, judging which patches were safe, which layers had matured enough to burn efficiently, and which spots could be harvested without collapsing the surrounding earth. After cutting, the peat was useless if used immediately. Fresh peat was wet, heavy, and incapable of sustaining a fire. Attempting to burn it would smother flames, fill homes of acrid smoke, and fail to generate sufficient heat. Drying peat was a ritual in itself. Blocks were laid out carefully in long rows, stacked in alternating patterns to maximize air circulation, and turned regularly to ensure uniform drying. Some families built small towers, known as ricks, that allowed wind and sun to pass freely between blocks. Entire summer months were devoted to this preparation, and a single mistake, a stack knocked over by wind or rain, could spell disaster months later, when cold and darkness were at their most oppressive. As autumn approached, dried peat transformed, it hardened, became lighter, and acquired a surprisingly firm texture. Striking two blocks together produced a dull, hollow sound. Families meticulously stacked the ready fuel near their homes, often arranging it not just for storage but as insulation, building walls of peat alongside cottages to block wind and trap warmth. In regions where trees were a luxury and coal non-existent, peat was survival. Without it, a winter could claim lives within days. Peat burned unlike wood. It did not flare and dance with high flames. Instead it glowed steadily, radiating heat slowly and consistently. This made it ideal for nights, when tending a roaring fire was impossible. The embers of a peat fire could last for hours if banked correctly under ash, releasing warmth steadily while consuming fuel at a controlled pace. Families learned to manipulate embers, adjusting airflow and fuel placement with an intimacy born of necessity. One misplaced block could extinguish the glow. One carefully positioned piece could sustain life for the night. Smoke from peat was heavy and oily, clinging stubbornly to walls, ceilings and anyone who lived with it. Rooms became shrouded in a constant haze, blackening timber and plaster. Travelers passing through peat, burning villages remarked on the thick, acrid smell, often gagging or shielding their eyes. Chroniclers wrote of these settlements with disdain, describing them as dark, smoky, and miserable. But for the peasants enduring -30 degrees F temperatures, smoke meant life. It meant that embers glowed under ash, it meant warmth, food cooked slowly, and children not frozen in their beds. What appeared to outsiders as filth was actually evidence of survival. Preparation of fuel, however, was only part of the struggle. Peat needed to be managed, rationed and supplemented. Families stored peat carefully, sometimes blending it with other combustibles such as dried dung, straw, or even scraps of wood. Each hearth became a center of strategy, where embers were banked and monitored, and the next block added just at the right time to maintain heat, without exhausting the stock too quickly. Knowledge of how to manage the fire was passed down silently, observed in the actions of parents, and practiced by children from a young age. Those who survived winter knew instinctively how to read a hearth, the color of embers, the thickness of smoke, and even the smell of burning peat were vital signals. Children grew up in smoke-filled rooms, learning these signals early. They learned how to stack peat to allow maximum airflow, how much to add to avoid suffocation, and how to preserve embers overnight. Their education was practical, immediate, and a matter of life or death. Mistakes were punished not by scolding, but by the consequences of cold, hunger, or illness. The lessons were unrelenting but crucial, shaping the next generation of survivors. Access to peat also carried social significance. Some families controlled superior cutting areas, allowing them to harvest drier, higher quality blocks, while others worked less fertile or more dangerous bogs. Disputes arose, though they were often quiet, stealing peat at night or surreptitiously claiming extra blocks. Fuel scarcity could strain relationships, but it also fostered community networks, as villages sometimes coordinated cutting and storage, sharing knowledge and labor in ways that increased everyone's chance of survival. Peat carried dangers beyond scarcity. Smoke inhalation caused chronic lung damage. The bogs themselves were treacherous, hidden floods, and soft ground could easily claim a life. Drying stacks could collapse in storms, and fire accidents within homes were common. The very element that kept peasants alive in winter could also endanger them. Yet, for those living in treeless northern landscapes, there was no alternative. Peat was not just fuel, it was insurance against the lethal cold. The smell, the labor, the smoke, all of it became woven into daily life. Homes, villages, and routines adapted. Ceilings were kept low, rooms small, and windows tiny. Structures were built to retain heat, absorb smoke, and maximize efficiency. Architecture itself reflected survival strategies honed over generations. Travelers might have viewed the villages as dark and depressing, but the inhabitants saw them differently. Every stack of peat, every smudge on the walls, every banked ember was a mark of endurance. It was proof that people had survived another winter, that knowledge had been applied successfully, and that life, tenuous and fragile, continued. The cyclical nature of peat survival was relentless. By spring, most fuel stocks were depleted, and families immediately began planning for the next winter. New peat had to be cut, dried, and stored. Lessons from failures were integrated into strategies for the following year. Every winter was a test, every summer a period of preparation, and every family's survival depended on the intimate understanding of bogs, fires, smoke, and embers. Peat may have seemed humble to an outsider, mere mud harvested from bogs, but it was the heartbeat of life in extreme northern winters. It was the difference between warmth and frostbite, between survival and death. It shaped architecture, daily routines, social structures, and even psychology. It was not glamorous, it did not burn bright. It did not smell pleasant. But it burned reliably, consistently, and in a world where freezing temperatures ruled, that was all that mattered. For generations, families endured because they understood this truth: preparation, skill, and respect for peat meant survival. They learned to work with the earth, to preserve fire, to manipulate smoke, and to ration their precious resources. They passed this knowledge down silently, embedding it into every action, every habit, and every breath. Children who grew up in peat burning villages inherited an intuition for survival that outsiders could scarcely imagine. And so, as winter descended and temperatures fell toward -30°F, peat became more than fuel, it became life itself. Every flicker of embers, every banked glow, every careful addition to the fire carried the weight of months of labor, and the hope of enduring until spring. Those who underestimated it, who wasted it, or who failed to respect it paid the price. Those who mastered it survived. And in the freezing smoke-filled cottages of medieval Europe, life persisted against the odds, one glowing block of peat at a time. Winter had settled fully over the village, and the cold was no longer a visitor, but a relentless resident. Temperatures plummeted toward -30°F, and the land itself seemed to harden into unyielding ice. The peasants who had spent months preparing, now faced the full force of the season. Smoke curled from every roof where peat burned, thick and persistent, filling the air with its pungent oily scent. It clung to hair, clothing and skin, infiltrating every breath, yet it was proof of life. Without those glowing embers, even the sturdiest walls offered no protection. Inside their homes, families moved with careful precision. Children huddled together on straw mattresses, their small bodies pressed for warmth. Adults monitored fires constantly, adjusting embers and adding peat with almost instinctive timing. A single misjudgment could leave the hearth smoldering instead of glowing, robbing the room of its fragile heat. Peat burned steadily, slowly releasing warmth, but it required attention, skill, and respect. Families had long learned to read the subtle cues, the color of the embers, the faint smell of burning, the rising smoke. Each signal indicated whether the fire would last until morning or if a dangerous cold sweep would follow. Outside, the village was a frozen tableau. Snow clung in thick layers to roofs, weighing heavily on thatch, threatening collapse. Frozen streams cut through the landscape like veins of ice. Livestock, essential for milk, meat, and dung for fuel, huddled in makeshift shelters. Those animals that survived the bitter nights were cared for with meticulous attention. Feeding them too little risked death, feeding them too late risked frozen water or frostbitten feed. The lives of animals were intertwined with the survival of humans, as the dung, bones, and fat they provided were crucial sources of heat and nutrition. Life in the house was a continuous negotiation between smoke, warmth, and space. The air was thick, and movement stirred it constantly, making eyes water and throats burn. Children learned to navigate these conditions, crawling near the hearth where the smoke was lighter and the heat strongest. Adults worked around them, feeding embers, preparing meager meals, and performing essential tasks in near darkness. Light was minimal, windows were tiny and often covered with animal skins to prevent drafts. The smoky haze made day and night indistinguishable, and yet the family adapted. Their bodies grew accustomed to the discomfort, their lungs thickened, and eyes adjusted. Survival demanded such adaptation. Meals were small but strategically planned. Porridge made from grains stored carefully for months was the staple. Occasionally, salted or smoked meat was added. Every calorie mattered. Cooking required fire, but the fire itself required fuel, so meals were prepared with frugality. Water had to be thawed, often from frozen streams or melted snow, adding to the labor of survival. Each action was choreographed to conserve heat, prevent exhaustion, and maintain a balance between food and fuel. Hunger was omnipresent but managed with rationing and ingenuity. Leaves, roots, and bark sometimes supplemented diets when stores ran low. Preparation for the night was ritualized. Families banked embers carefully, adding ash to preserve heat while slowing combustion. Beds were arranged to maximize warmth, often in clusters, with adults and children huddled together. Clothes were layered strategically, and even small gestures, like adjusting a sleeping child closer to the fire, could make the difference between life and death. The act of going to sleep was not restful but deliberate, a careful calculation of warmth, exhaustion and vigilance. Even in sleep attention was necessary. A fire that went out during the night could kill quickly. Outside, the wind howled through the village, carrying sharp needles of cold that penetrated every weak point in walls and roofs. Peasants moved cautiously, their feet crunching over frozen snow, their hands wrapped in rags or leather. The act of venturing outdoors was itself a calculated risk. Collecting more peat or dung required exposure. Yet without these essentials, the fire could not last, and the interior cold would become unbearable. Children were often kept inside during these excursions, only stepping out briefly for water or to help carry small bundles of fuel. Adults bore the brunt of labor. Their bodies hardened by months of preparation. Their endurance pushed to extremes. Smoke, while vital, was both friend and enemy. It preserved warmth and indicated life, but prolonged exposure caused chronic coughing, lung damage and eye irritation. Families developed methods to cope, arranging hearths to channel smoke away from sleeping areas, creating low benches where smoke pooled less, and teaching children to cover mouths with cloths when it became too dense. Acceptance of discomfort became instinctual. The very act of breathing was intertwined with pain and survival. The interplay of hunger and fuel dictated nearly every action. Consuming a piece of fat or a bone provided calories but reduced fire fuel. Burning straw or dung added warmth, but removed insulation or future bedding. Every decision had immediate consequences. Mistakes were costly, and families developed a relentless attentiveness to every resource. This constant vigilance defined daily life, shaping behavior, routines, and social interactions. Community played a role even within the household. Extended families, neighbors, and village networks shared information, labor, and sometimes resources. Peasants checked each other's smoke to ensure no home had gone cold, offering advice, lending peat, or assisting in stoking fires. Social bonds were strengthened by the necessity of survival. Yet competition for scarce resources also bred tension. Balancing cooperation with self-preservation was a delicate art, one learned through experience and observation. Children observed, imitated, and learned quickly. They watched adults judge embers, add fuel, and prepare meals with precision. They noticed subtle differences in smoke color and thickness, learned to distinguish the warmth of a properly banked fire from a dying one, and internalized these lessons as survival instinct. Education was not theoretical. It was immediately practical. Mistakes could be fatal, and learning came through repetition, observation, and occasional consequence. The psychological toll was significant. Constant vigilance, fear of freezing, and awareness of scarcity created stress that weighed heavily. Adults coped through ritual, repetition, and small moments of humor. Stories around the fire, brief jokes, and memories of past winters provided relief. Children absorbed these coping mechanisms, learning to manage fear through routine and observation. Faith, superstition, and small praise offered another layer of psychological protection, providing hope that endurance could be rewarded with survival, and the eventual return of spring. As the season progressed, the landscape outside the village transformed. Snowdrifts rose against walls, roofs sagged under weight, and frozen rivers became both barrier and resource. Peasants became intimately familiar with their environment, reading the ice, wind, and snow for signs of danger. Every step outdoors was measured. Miscalculations could mean falling through ice, exposure to deadly wind, or accidents while carrying fuel. Experience was invaluable. Those who had survived previous winters navigated these risks with practiced skill, teaching others through example and instruction. Even minor errors had consequences. A collapsed peat stack could ruin weeks of preparation, leaving a family short of fuel in the dead of winter. A poorly banked fire could burn too quickly, consuming precious resources before the cold had passed. Small misjudgments, overestimating a child's caloric needs, underestimating wind chill, or failing to check embers before sleep, could escalate rapidly into life-threatening situations. Survival demanded meticulous attention to every detail, every hour, every ember. Over time, families internalized the rhythms of survival. Tasks became instinctive, almost automatic: stoking embers, checking smoke, rationing food, layering clothing, and monitoring children. The repetition created a rhythm that sustained life even under extreme conditions. Knowledge became a tangible asset, passed silently from parent to child, from neighbor to neighbor. Each generation refined techniques, improved storage, adjusted hearth management, and expanded understanding of the bogs, fuel, and weather. Despite the brutality, life continued in small ways. Children played near the hearth, laughing briefly, their games a mix of mischief and mimicry of adult survival. Animals provided companionship, warmth, and sometimes nourishment. Social interactions, though constrained by cold and scarcity, reinforced bonds. Every shared story, every exchanged piece of advice, every careful hand on an ember contributed to collective endurance. Even as temperatures fell further, the peasants endured. Smoke, heat, and labor combined in a delicate balance that allowed life to persist. The peat, dark and unassuming, was the silent hero, sustaining warmth and life where nothing else could. Families had learned to respect it, and use it with precision. To outsiders, these villages may have seemed grim, smoky, and bleak, but to those who lived within them, they were sanctuaries of warmth, endurance, and life in a world dominated by cold. By the end of the season, the survivors had achieved a remarkable feat. Each day, hour by hour, they had navigated a landscape of ice, snow, hunger, smoke, and exhaustion. They had transformed bog mud into warmth, labor into survival, and despair into endurance. The peat that had seemed mundane in summer had become a symbol of life itself, sustaining human existence in conditions that would have overwhelmed the unprepared. The cold had become a constant companion, creeping into every crevice of the peasants' lives. By now, families were accustomed to the steady rhythm of survival. But no amount of preparation could make the extreme winter comfortable. Every movement required calculation, every breath was a negotiation with the freezing air, and every task was a test of endurance. The lessons of previous months had sharpened their instincts, but the dead of winter demanded constant vigilance. In the early hours before dawn, cottages were filled with the soft crackle of peat fires. The glowing embers provided not only warmth but a lifeline, reminding each family that survival was possible. Adults rose first, tending embers, checking that the heat persisted, and ensuring that children remained bundled in layers of cloth and straw. Small hands helped where they could, passing peat, stirring embers, or carrying scraps of firewood, learning through participation the subtle art of balancing warmth and resource. Mistakes were dangerous, but they were also the most effective teachers. Food remained scarce. Porridge, thick and lukewarm, was served with minimal embellishment. Occasionally, preserved meat or a small portion of fat was added. But even these were rationed with precision. Families had learned that hunger was manageable when combined with warmth, but hypothermia could strike at any moment if the fire died. Meals became a strategic activity, a calculation of energy intake versus fuel expenditure. Each bite of food had to be stretched to provide maximum calories, sometimes requiring careful sharing between children, elders, and adults. The day's labor began as soon as the first light filtered through the small windows. Peat, dung, and straw needed tending. Any mismanagement could threaten survival for hours, if not days. In the deepest cold, traveling to distant bogs or fields was perilous. Snow and ice turned simple errands into potential death traps. Families planned every excursion meticulously, timing it to coincide with the warmest parts of the day, and ensuring that the minimal number of people ventured out. Those left behind tended fires, prepared meals, and cared for children and livestock. Survival was a coordinated effort, a carefully choreographed series of actions repeated over months. The smoke that filled cottages was omnipresent. It was thick, oily, and persistent, clinging to hair, skin, and clothing. Visitors entering these homes were often overwhelmed, but the peasants themselves had adapted. their lungs had grown accustomed to the acrid haze, and their eyes, though reddened and constantly watery, learned to function despite it. Smoke became a background rhythm of life, signaling warmth and sustenance even as it assaulted the senses. It was an irritant, yes, but it was also a protector. The sign that life endured within walls that would otherwise be inhospitable. The children, despite their youth, were active participants in survival. They carried small bundles of peat from storage areas, assisted in stirring embers, and learned to judge the color and texture of fire. Play and work intertwined. Games often simulated adult tasks, preparing them for the responsibilities of the seasons to come. The adults observed closely, correcting mistakes and praising cleverness, aware that these lessons could literally save lives in the dead of winter. Each child became a small apprentice in the delicate management of fire, smoke, food, and warmth. Every action was weighed against potential consequences. A poorly banked fire could consume fuel too quickly, leaving a home freezing in the middle of the night. Adding too much peat at once could smother the flames, generating thick smoke that choked the inhabitants. Even the way embers were stirred mattered too roughly, and heat dissipated too gently, and combustion slowed, producing less warmth. Families developed an intuitive understanding of these nuances, a knowledge embedded through years of experience and repeated observation. Livestock were central to survival. Cows, goats, sheep and even chickens provided milk, eggs, meat, and dung for fuel. Animals were kept indoors or in small shelters during the harshest cold, their bodies radiating residual warmth that contributed to human comfort. Feeding them was a precise science. Overfeeding could waste scarce resources, underfeeding could weaken them, reducing milk or risking death. Animals were both companions and tools of survival, their care inseparable from human well-being. The harsh landscape outside was a constant threat. Snowdrifts created treacherous paths, and icy rivers and frozen fields concealed danger. Peasants learned to read the land carefully, noting weak ice, unstable snow, and the signs of hidden water. Every excursion was fraught with risk, yet essential for collecting fuel, water or food. Experienced adults moved with careful efficiency, balancing speed against safety. Children observed silently, internalizing these lessons as part of their education in survival. Smoke, while necessary, created its own hazards. Constant inhalation led to coughing, sore eyes and long-term lung damage. Families adapted through small innovations. Benches placed to reduce exposure, cloths held over mouths, and careful placement of fires to reduce smoke density near sleeping areas. Despite the discomfort, smoke was a vital ally, its presence signaling life and warmth in an environment that could otherwise be fatal. The interplay of hunger and heat dictated nearly every choice. Every scrap of food could be consumed for calories or used to preserve embers. Animal fat, bones or even dried dung could be used as fuel. Families constantly calculated the optimal use of resources, balancing the immediate need against the long-term need for sustenance. These choices were learned through repetition, observation, and sometimes painful experience. Mental endurance was as crucial as physical labor. Fear of freezing, hunger, or fire accidents was omnipresent, and families developed strategies to cope. Ritualized actions, checking embers at specific intervals, arranging beds in precise patterns, and maintaining predictable routines, provided a sense of control in an otherwise uncontrollable environment. Humor, storytelling, and song around the hearth offered brief respite, reinforcing community bonds and providing psychological fortitude. Faith also played a role, offering hope and structure to lives dominated by uncertainty. Despite scarcity and danger, communities remained interdependent. Neighbors shared knowledge about fire management, rationing strategies, and hidden supplies of peat or food. Some families pooled labor, coordinating trips to bogs, stacking fuel, or repairing shelters. Social bonds were reinforced under the pressure of survival. Cooperation could mean the difference between life and death, while neglect or hoarding could isolate families and increase mortality risk. Every day was measured against the clock of survival. Decisions were tactical. When to feed the fire, when to thaw water, when to collect fuel. Observation was constant, monitoring embers, smoke, food stores, and the health of children and animals. The cold dictated pace and priorities, and efficiency became a mark of experience and competence. Those who mastered these rhythms were more likely to endure, while inexperience could be fatal. Sleep was adapted to the cold. Families huddled together, bodies pressed to share warmth. Embers carefully banked to prevent freezing through the night. Sleep was light and interrupted, with adults waking to check fires, stir embers, or move children closer to heat. Even rest required vigilance. A single lapse could result in hypothermia or death. Over time, these patterns became instinctual, a natural part of daily survival. Small acts of ingenuity emerged from necessity, stacking embers and ash to slow combustion, combining peat with dried dung for extended burn time, using animal hides to block drafts. All these practices were honed over years, passed down through generations. Children learned these strategies as practical knowledge, not theory, observing adults and experimenting under supervision. Survival became a skill embedded in every action, every breath, and every choice. The villagers also became experts in reading environmental cues. The thickness of ice, the smell of snow, the direction of wind, and even the behavior of animals were signals that informed daily decisions. Those who could interpret these signs accurately managed risk and extended survival, while misreading the environment could have fatal consequences. Experience created an almost intuitive understanding of the world, allowing peasants to navigate extreme conditions with remarkable precision. By the middle of winter, families had settled into a rhythm that balanced fire, food, work, and vigilance. Life was harsh, repetitive, and exhausting, but it was also sustained by skill, knowledge, and adaptation. The peat burned steadily, embers glowed under ash, and meals, though modest, provided enough energy to continue enduring the cold. Smoke-filled cottages were alive with activity, laughter, and strategy, a testament to human resilience in the face of relentless winter. Even as days passed, the peasants remained acutely aware that survival depended on constant attention. Every ember, every scrap of food, every animal was vital. They had learned that winter was not a season to endure passively. It demanded active engagement, meticulous management, and unbroken vigilance. Their lives were a continuous negotiation with cold, hunger, and fire, each day a measure of endurance and skill. By the time spring seemed within reach, the villagers had survived countless nights of smoke, frost, and hunger. They had transformed peat and dung into warmth, labor into survival, and despair into hope. The experience left its mark on bodies, minds, and communities, shaping a generation of peasants who understood the unforgiving logic of extreme winter. Survival in -30°F conditions was never guaranteed, yet the ingenuity, discipline, and endurance of the peasants allowed life to persist. They had mastered fire, rationed food with precision, navigated treacherous landscapes, and adapted psychologically to discomfort and danger. Every glow of peat, every bank ember, every careful ration reflected months of labor, observation, and communal knowledge. In the darkest, coldest months, these families endured because they had learned the rules of survival, passed down from generation to generation, ensuring that life, however fragile, continued. The winter deepened, and the nights grew longer, colder, and more relentless. Every day was measured against the unforgiving rhythm of survival, and the villagers had long since internalized the routines that kept them alive. Smoke curled from every roof, thick and persistent, a constant reminder of both protection and struggle. The peat, dark and heavy, burned slowly, releasing warmth while demanding meticulous care. Its glow illuminated the small, low-ceilinged homes, casting dancing shadows on walls blackened by years of smoke. Within these walls, life persisted through habit, observation, and sheer endurance. The mornings began in near darkness, often before the sun rose, though in the depths of winter, daylight was brief and pale. Adults rose first, stirring embers to life, adding small blocks of peat with careful precision. Children, still half asleep, followed, assisting in small ways, carrying peat, tending animals, or bringing water that had been thawed and stored. Every movement had a purpose, every task calculated to conserve energy, preserve fuel, and maintain warmth. Even the simple act of moving through the smoky interior required adaptation, as eyes stung and lungs burned with each inhalation. Meals were measured, modest, and strategic. A thin porridge provided minimal sustenance, but it was enough to sustain the labor of tending fire, feeding animals, and navigating the treacherous snow outside. Salted meat or dried fish was rationed carefully, often cut into the smallest possible portions. Each bite represented an exercise in survival economics. Consume too much, and the family risked depletion; consume too little, and strength would wane. Hunger was omnipresent, a constant background hum, but the glowed embers and the warmth they provided allowed people to endure it. The work of the day was dictated by necessity. Peat, dung, and straw required constant attention. While summer and autumn were devoted to preparation and drying, winter demanded management, careful allocation, and preservation. Embers were stirred regularly to maintain optimal heat, ash was arranged to slow combustion, and peat blocks were rotated to ensure uniform burning. A poorly managed fire could leave a household vulnerable to the deadly cold. These skills were learned early and practiced daily, becoming instinctive. Children observed, imitated, and gradually mastered these techniques, understanding that the survival of their family depended on precision and timing. The village itself was a frozen landscape. Snow and ice blanketed the fields, rivers, and roads, turning them into treacherous obstacles. Movement outdoors required caution, skill, and local knowledge. Peasants read the ice, snow drifts, and wind patterns with remarkable accuracy, knowing where footing was secure and where hidden dangers lurked. A misstep could lead to broken bones, hypothermia, or death. Travel for fuel, water, or firewood was a calculated risk, undertaken only when necessary, and always with careful attention to timing, routes, and the condition of the cold. Inside the cottages, smoke became both friend and foe. Its acrid, oily smell was inescapable, infiltrating skin, hair, and clothing. Eyes burned and water constantly. Lungs adjusted to constant irritation, yet the smoke was a life-giving force. It indicated warmth, embers, and a fire maintained successfully. Peasants developed methods to cope. Benches were arranged to reduce exposure. Cloths were used to filter inhalation. And the placement of peat blocks was adjusted to minimize smoke density near sleeping areas. Families learned to live with discomfort as a constant, unavoidable companion. Animals remained central to survival. Cows, goats, sheep, and chickens were housed carefully to conserve body heat, provide milk, and supply dung for fuel. Feeding schedules were precise, ensuring that no animal suffered unnecessarily, while also conserving precious resources. Livestock were sources of warmth, food, and materials, their survival intertwined with human survival. Every animal was monitored, every behavior noted, and small variations in condition could indicate health problems that, if ignored, might jeopardize the household's entire winter strategy. The psychological toll of extreme winter was as significant as the physical challenge. Constant vigilance, fear of hypothermia, hunger, and smoke created stress that could be overwhelming. Families developed coping strategies to maintain morale and mental clarity. Ritualized actions, checking fires at specific intervals, arranging beds in predictable patterns, and maintaining repetitive routines, provided a sense of control. Humor, storytelling, and shared memories around the hearth offered brief respite. Children absorbed these lessons early, learning to manage fear and discomfort through observation and repetition. Faith, superstition, and prayers provided another layer of psychological resilience, a belief that endurance could be rewarded with life and warmth. Even minor innovations made a tangible difference. Arranging embers under ash slowed combustion, combining peat with dried dung extended burn time, and layering straw and hides in specific patterns preserved warmth. Families experimented cautiously, observing the results and refining techniques over time. Knowledge was practical, empirical, and passed down through generations, forming an oral tradition of survival that extended beyond the immediate family. Every successful adaptation was a triumph, every mistake a lesson etched into memory. Outside, the environment remained a formidable opponent. Snowdrifts threatened to block paths, ice concealed hidden creeks, and wind cut through even the best prepared clothing. The peasants' clothing, layered from wool, animal hides, and rags, provided insulation but required careful maintenance. Wet garments had to be dried near embers, but too close risked sparks or overheating. Every step, every decision, every moment was a negotiation with the elements, a careful balance of risk and necessity. The interplay of fuel, food, and labor dominated daily life. Each task required careful timing and coordination. Stoking a fire consumed fuel but it prevented freezing. Preparing a meal burned energy but provided calories. Venturing outdoors risked exposure but secured resources. Families developed a rhythm, a pattern of work, rest, and vigilance that allowed them to survive despite extreme conditions. This rhythm became instinctual, guiding actions even under fatigue, hunger, or fear. Community remained vital. Villagers monitored one another, sharing advice, labor, and occasionally resources. Smoke from a neighbor's cottage indicated life and warmth, while a lack of it could prompt intervention, delivering peat, assisting with fire maintenance or offering food. Cooperation was essential. Yet scarcity could also breed tension. Families had to balance generosity with self-preservation, understanding that the survival of one household often depended on the collective endurance of the village. Children, now seasoned by months of winter, took on increasing responsibilities. They moved quickly through snow, carried fuel, assisted with animal care, and even participated in managing embers. Their education was immediate and practical. Mistakes could be costly, but experience forged skill and instinct. By midwinter, the younger generation had developed a profound understanding of the delicate balance between warmth, food, and vigilance. Sleep remained interrupted and strategic. Families huddled together, embers banked under ash, fires tended periodically throughout the night. Even rest required attention. A single lapse in fire management could result in hypothermia. Over time, these patterns became ingrained, guiding behavior instinctively. Mental resilience and attention to routine were as crucial as physical labor, each supporting the other in the relentless cycle of survival. Despite hardship, life continued in small, meaningful ways. Children played near the fire, laughing briefly, mimicking adult tasks, and learning survival through imitation. Animals provided warmth, food, and companionship. Stories, songs, and humor created psychological sustenance, reinforcing bonds within families and the broader village. Every ember tended, every rationed meal, every careful movement was a testament to human endurance. The winter pressed on, its days dark and its nights interminably cold. But the villagers endured. Smoke, embers, rationed food, and layered clothing formed a network of survival that, though imperfect, allowed life to continue. The peat burned slowly, faithfully, and predictably, a small but crucial anchor in the storm of frost and darkness. The villagers' lives were defined by their interaction with it, their skill in using it, and their vigilance in preserving it. By the time winter reached its deepest point, the peasants had mastered a delicate balance. Every day was a negotiation between fuel, labor, and vigilance. Every ember, every scrap of food, and every animal was vital. Families had internalized routines, making instinctive choices that determined survival. They had learned to endure, adapt, and innovate, turning hardship into a cycle of resilience. Even as the cold threatened to overwhelm them, the peasants survived. Each glowing block of peat, each careful ration, Each moment of attention reflected months of preparation, observation, and generational knowledge. Life persisted through smoke, hunger, exhaustion, and frost. A testament to the power of skill, routine, and human endurance. In the freezing cottages of medieval Europe, survival was not passive. It was deliberate, meticulous, and unrelenting. Every day was a victory, every night endured a triumph, and every ember burned a quiet defiance against the merciless cold. By now, the villagers had settled into a rhythm dictated entirely by the unyielding winter. The snow lay thick and compacted across fields, roads and riverbanks, turning familiar paths into treacherous courses of ice and hidden drifts. Every trip outside was measured, cautious, and deliberate. Yet survival demanded that they leave the warmth of their peat-lit homes to gather fuel, check livestock, and maintain the fragile infrastructure that allowed life to continue. Children, though small and vulnerable, often assisted, learning the routes, the rhythms of the landscape, and the subtle cues that indicated safe passage versus hidden danger. Within their cottages, smoke curled and pooled, heavy and acrid, yet vital. Adults moved with practiced efficiency, tending the fire, feeding animals, and preparing sustenance with minimal waste. The peat burned steadily. Its embers banked under layers of ash to slow consumption, and preserve heat for the long night. Families had learned to manipulate the fire with precision, adjusting airflow, adding blocks in sequence, and using small scraps of dung or straw to maintain an even glow. Any misstep could have catastrophic consequences. The cold was relentless, indifferent to mistakes, unforgiving in its toll. Meals were exercises in strategy. Porridge, grain, or the occasional preserved meat provided the minimal calories necessary to sustain work. Every scrap was accounted for. Children learned the value of moderation, observing how adults stretched limited resources to sustain the household. Even small indulgences had to be weighed against long-term survival. A piece of fat consumed in the morning meant less heat from the fire at night. Meat added to the pot reduced stock for later rationing. Hunger was a constant companion. Yet the glow of the hearth, the warmth of clustered bodies, and the rhythm of daily survival allowed the villagers to endure it. Outside, the winter landscape was merciless. Snow drifted high against walls, sometimes threatening to collapse roofs that had been reinforced with straw and wood. Ice glazed rivers and streams, concealing treacherous weak spots beneath a deceptive, smooth surface. Travel required skill, local knowledge, and careful observation. Villagers rid the terrain as if it were a living document, noting shifts in snow, changes in wind, and subtle disturbances that indicated hidden dangers. One misstep could mean broken limbs, hypothermia, or worse. Experience became the compass by which they navigated the frozen world, and those who had endured previous winters guided the young with patience and authority. Smoke, both friend and adversary, filled every cottage. It signaled life, warmth, and successful management of the hearth, yet it was a constant irritant. Eyes burned and watered, lungs thickened from prolonged exposure, and clothing and hair carried the smell for days. Peasants adapted, creating benches, hearth placements, and makeshift chimneys that directed smoke away from sleeping areas, minimizing the most harmful effects while retaining heat. The discomfort became normalized, a measure of endurance as familiar as the frost that crept along the floors and walls. Animals were integral to daily survival. Cows, sheep, goats, and chickens provided milk, eggs, meat, and dung for fuel. They were housed in small shelters adjacent to the cottages, their body heat adding to the ambient warmth. Feeding schedules were precise, with careful rationing to ensure that each animal could survive and contribute to human survival. Sick or weak animals were tended immediately. Their loss could mean a critical reduction in warmth food. Livestock became more than property. They were co-survivors, relied upon for sustenance, heat and resources necessary to navigate the harshest months. Every action from stirring embers to feeding livestock was a negotiation with the harsh environment. The cold demanded attention at all times, and even minor lapses could have cascading consequences. Families had learned to coordinate their labor meticulously. Adults divided responsibilities tending the fire, preparing meals, maintaining shelters, and caring for animals. Children assisted in appropriate capacities, gradually absorbing knowledge and skill. The household became a synchronized unit, a delicate ecosystem balanced on attention, effort, and observation. Psychological endurance was as crucial as physical labor. Constant vigilance against cold hunger and smoke-induced discomfort weighed heavily on the mind. Ritualized routines, repetition of tasks, and communal activities provided a measure of stability. Humor, song, and storytelling around the fire offered moments of relief, reinforcing social bonds, and allowing a temporary escape from the oppressive cold. Faith and superstition offered hope and reassurance, providing context for suffering and reinforcing the belief that persistence could lead to survival. Innovation emerged out of necessity. Families discovered small efficiencies arranging peat blocks to maximize airflow, combining dung and straw for prolonged burn time, using animal hides as insulation, or constructing makeshift vents to direct smoke. Each adaptation was carefully observed, refined, and passed down as practical knowledge. Generational wisdom was embedded in every gesture, every technique, every precaution. Mistakes were instructive, shaping future decisions and enhancing the survival repertoire of the household. The community remained central. Villagers monitored each other, shared advice, and occasionally exchanged limited resources. Smoke from a neighbor's chimney indicated life and vitality. While the absence of smoke could trigger assistance, cooperation was vital, but scarcity also created tension. Families had to navigate complex social dynamics, balancing generosity with self-preservation. Survival depended on maintaining these relationships, understanding that collective endurance often determined individual survival. Children's roles expanded as the winter deepened. They carried fuel, assisted with tending embers, monitored animals, and observed adult strategies. Their education was immediate, practical, and life-altering. Experience honed instinct, missteps were corrected gently or through direct observation. By midwinter, children were almost indistinguishable in skill from adults in specific survival tasks, having internalized the subtle cues and patterns that governed every day. Sleep was strategic and interrupted. Families huddled close, embers banked to preserve warmth through the night. Adults woke periodically to stir embers, adjust bedding, or monitor children. Even rest was a conscious act, executed with the awareness that a single lapse could lethal consequences. Over time, these sleep patterns became instinctual, guiding behavior without conscious thought. Mental acuity and resilience were maintained through habit, necessity, and continuous attention. Despite hardship, life persisted in small, meaningful ways. Children played briefly near the hearth, mimicking adult tasks, laughing quietly, and absorbing lessons through imitation. Animals provided warmth, companionship, and sustenance. Social interaction, though constrained by cold and scarcity, reinforced bonds. Every ember stoked, every rationed meal, and every careful movement reflect only survival, but also the human capacity to adapt, endure, and thrive in adversity. Even in extreme cold, families maintained vigilance over minor details that could have major consequences. A poorly banked fire could extinguish overnight, leaving the household vulnerable. Misjudged rations could cause weakness or illness. Every animal, every scrap of food, every ember required attention and care. Survival was a constant balancing act, with no margin for error. Families who mastered these rhythms endured, while those who faltered faced deadly consequences. By midwinter, experience had honed the villagers' instincts. Tasks that once required conscious effort were executed almost automatically. Adults moved through routines with precision, children anticipated needs before being told, and the household operated as a synchronized unit. Knowledge of fuel, fire, rationing, and landscape had become instinctive. Survival depended not just on resources but on skill, observation, and adaptability. The interplay between community and household was ever present. Villagers relied on each other for advice, labor, and occasional resources. Smoke from a neighbor's chimney indicated life and warmth, while its absence could trigger visits to offer aid. Generosity and cooperation were essential, yet carefully balanced with the need for self-preservation. Social bonds were reinforced under pressure, creating networks of resilience that extended survival beyond individual households. Mental and emotional endurance was tested continuously. Fear, exhaustion, and discomfort were constant companions. Ritualized behavior, communal support, storytelling, and faith helped villagers maintain equilibrium. Humor, song, and shared narrative provided emotional sustenance, allowing brief reprieve from the oppressive cold. Adults modeled calm, confidence, and resilience, teaching children to manage fear, discomfort, and uncertainty through observation and imitation. Even minor innovations had profound effects on survival. Strategic placement of peat, combining fuel sources, redirecting smoke, and layering insulation improved warmth and efficiency. Every successful experiment became a part of communal knowledge, embedded in daily routines and passed down through observation. Mistakes, while sometimes costly, informed future behavior and enhanced the survival capacity of the household and community. The villagers had become experts in reading the environment. Subtle signs in snow, ice, wind, and animal behavior guided decisions about travel, fuel collection, and shelter maintenance. Knowledge of these signals was a matter of life and death, honed through repetition and observation. Children absorbed these lessons quickly, internalizing an almost instinctual understanding of their surroundings. As winter pressed on, the villagers endured. Smoke, embers, rationed food, layered clothing, and vigilant routines created a network of survival. Every day was a negotiation with cold, hunger, and fatigue, yet families adapted. The peat burned steadily, faithfully offering warmth and hope. Life continued in smoke-filled cottages, a testament to skill, observation, and human endurance. By the end of the season, families had survived countless nights of frost, hunger, and smoke. Every ember, rationed meal, and careful movement reflected months of preparation, labor, and knowledge passed through generations. Survival was not passive, it required attention, precision, and vigilance. The villagers endured not through luck but through skill, experience, and adaptation. Their mastery of fire, fuel, and human ingenuity turned a lethal winter into a story of endurance. The bitter cold continued its relentless grip over the village, transforming the world into a frozen expanse of white and ice. Every day felt like a battle against nature, and every night a test of endurance and resourcefulness. The villagers had long since internalized routines that maximized their chances of survival, yet the season still demanded constant vigilance. Each moment was dictated by the interplay of fire, food, fuel, and the perilous outside world. Inside the cottages, smoke rose thickly from peat fires, filling the rooms with a pungent, oily haze that clung to walls, ceilings, and every person within. The scent, while harsh, had become familiar and comforting, a sign that warmth persisted and life endured. Adults moved with practiced precision, adding peat to embers banked under ash, ensuring steady heat throughout the night and into the early hours of the morning. The rhythm of tending fire had become second nature, but one small miscalculation could mean freezing or illness. The balance between fuel consumption and warmth was a daily calculation, one that demanded attention, skill, and foresight. Children, now more capable than ever, assisted with small but essential tasks. They carried peat from storage, checked the water supply, and observed the subtle cues of a fire's health, its color, its smoke, the heat radiating from embers. Through observation and hands-on experience, they absorbed knowledge that could save lives. Mistakes were gently corrected, and the lessons were often remembered more vividly because of the immediate consequences of error. The process of learning survival was immersive and unrelenting. yet necessary for life in such extreme conditions. Meals remained minimal but carefully managed. Thick porridge, occasionally supplemented with preserved meat or fat, provided sustenance for the long hours of labor required to maintain warmth and care for livestock. Every scrap of food was rationed meticulously. Eating too much too quickly risked depleting scarce resources, while consuming too little threatened strength and resilience. Families had developed strategies over years. Children often ate first to ensure they had energy, and adults adjusted portions to conserve calories, while still maintaining their own strength. Each decision around food was a matter of life and death. Outside, the winter landscape remained unforgiving. Snowdrifts concealed hazards, rivers froze unevenly, and wind cut through even the warmest clothing. Peasants read the environment constantly, observing subtle signs in ice, snow, and animal behavior that indicated potential dangers or opportunities. Every trip outside, to gather fuel, water, or supplies, required careful planning, precise timing, and constant awareness. One misstep could result in frostbite, injury, or death. The villagers' familiarity with their surroundings, honed over years and generations, was essential for navigating this frozen world safely. Smoke, though necessary, presented ongoing challenges. It filled rooms with irritation, stung eyes, and thickened the lungs over time. Families adapted by positioning fires strategically, using benches and cloths to filter smoke, and organizing their living spaces to minimize exposure. The discomfort became a constant accepted aspect of life, a trade-off for the warmth and sustenance the fire provided. Despite these challenges, smoke was a reliable signal that life continued, and that survival was possible. Animals were treated with equal care and attention. Cows, goats, sheep, and chickens were housed near the warmth of the cottages, or in insulated shelters, their body heat contributing to the overall temperature. Feeding schedules were precise, with careful monitoring of each animal's health and condition. Sick or weak animals were tended immediately, as their loss could compromise both food supplies and fuel for fire. Livestock were more than possessions. They were vital contributors to the household's survival strategy, and their care was intertwined with human endurance. Every task in the household was a negotiation with the cold. Stirring embers, preparing food, feeding animals, and managing resources required constant attention and coordination. Adults divided labor efficiently, children assisted appropriately, and routines were synchronized to conserve energy while maximizing survival. Families became finely tuned units, each member's actions affecting the well-being of the whole. The skill and experience embedded in these routines reflected generations of adaptation to extreme conditions. Psychological endurance played a critical role. Constant exposure to cold, hunger, and smoke created stress and fatigue. Families developed coping strategies through ritual repetition, communal activity. Humor, storytelling, and song offered moments of relief, reinforcing social bonds and mental resilience. Children absorbed these lessons early, learning to manage fear and discomfort, and internalizing the rhythms of survival that adults had honed over years. Faith, superstition, and small prayers provided an additional layer of psychological support, offering hope that perseverance could lead to continued life and warmth. Innovation was crucial for enduring the depths of winter. Families experimented with small improvements, arranging peat blocks for optimal airflow, combining straw and dung to extend burn time, layering hides for insulation, and crafting vents to redirect smoke. Each successful adaptation was carefully observed, refined, and shared, creating a body of practical knowledge that sustained not only individual households but the broader village. Mistakes, while costly, informed future practice and enhanced the community's overall resilience. The community itself was central to survival. Neighbors shared advice, labor, and occasionally limited resources. Smoke from chimneys signaled life and activity, while an absence of smoke could prompt assistance. Cooperation was essential, but scarcity sometimes bred tension. Families balanced generosity with self-preservation, knowing that the survival of the collective often determined individual survival. Social bonds were both protective and necessary, reinforcing resilience in an otherwise harsh and unforgiving environment. Children's responsibilities expanded as winter progressed. They carried fuel, monitored embers, assisted with animal care, and learned to anticipate the needs of the household. Their education was immediate, practical, and life-saving. Experience honed instinct, while observation taught them to read the subtle signs that adults relied on for survival. By midwinter, children often performed critical tasks with skill comparable to adults, internalizing the complex balance between warmth, fuel, food, and vigilance. Sleep was strategic and light. Families huddled closely, embers banked to preserve warmth, periodically to tend fires or monitor children. Even rest required active engagement. One lapse could result in frostbite or hypothermia. Over time, these patterns became instinctual, guiding behavior automatically. Mental acuity and resilience were maintained not just through rest but through constant practice, observation, and adjustment. Despite extreme conditions, life persisted in small, meaningful ways. Children played briefly near the hearth, mimicking adult tasks, laughing quietly, and absorbing lessons through imitation. Animals provided warmth, companionship, and sustenance. Storytelling, music, and communal activity reinforced social bonds and offered psychological sustenance. Each ember stoked, every rationed meal, every deliberate movement was an act of survival, to human endurance, ingenuity, and adaptability. Minor details could have profound consequences. A poorly banked fire could leave a household vulnerable overnight. Mismanaged rations could weaken members or cause illness. Every animal, every ember, every scrap of food required attention. Survival was a delicate balance, and those who mastered it endured, while mistakes could be fatal. Experience, observation, and adaptation became the most valuable currency. By midwinter, the villagers had internalized rhythms of survival. Tasks once requiring conscious thought were executed instinctively. Adults moved with precision, children anticipated needs, and households functioned as coordinated units. Knowledge of fuel, fire, rationing, and environmental cues had become embedded in daily life. Survival depended not just on resources but on skill, awareness, and adaptability. Community ties reinforced these patterns. Villagers monitored each other, exchanged advice, and shared labor or limited resources when necessary. Smoke from a chimney indicated life and warmth, while its absence prompted assistance. Cooperation, tempered with caution, ensured collective resilience. The community itself was an extension of survival, enhancing the ability of each household to endure extreme conditions. Mental resilience remained essential. Stress, discomfort, and fear were constant companions, mitigated by ritual, social support, storytelling, and faith. Adults modeled calm, confidence, and endurance, teaching children to manage fear and discomfort. These psychological adaptations were as important as practical skills, ensuring that the mind remained focused and capable despite the harsh conditions. By the peak of winter, the villagers had survived countless nights of smoke, frost, and hunger. Every ember, every rationed meal, every careful movement reflected months of labor, preparation, and the transmission of knowledge across generations. Survival was deliberate, meticulous, and unrelenting. Life persisted not through luck but through skill, observation, and community support. The glowing peat, the layered insulation, the vigilant routines, each was a triumph against the merciless cold, proof of human endurance and ingenuity. The frozen landscape showed no mercy as winter pressed onward. Snow lay in thick layers over fields, rivers and paths, creating a world that was both silent and deadly. The wind sliced through any exposed skin, carrying a chill so sharp it burned through even the thickest hides. The villagers had long since accepted the harsh reality that survival required constant vigilance, relentless attention to fire, food and shelter. and careful observation of every change in the environment. Each day was an intricate balance act where a single lapse could have fatal consequences. Inside the cottages, the familiar smell of smoke filled every corner. Peat burned slowly, its embers carefully banked beneath layers of ash, to preserve warmth through the long hours of night. Adults moved with practiced precision, adding small blocks to maintain a steady glow, adjusting airflow, and monitoring the condition of embers. The fire demanded skill and attention. It was the lifeline between the deadly cold outside and the fragile comfort within. One poorly timed addition of fuel, or a mismanaged ember could lead to the fire dying out, a situation that would quickly turn dangerous. Children, now fully aware of the stakes, contributed with increasing competence. They carried peat from storage, assisted in managing embers, and observed the smallest changes in fire color, smoke density and heat. Through this hands-on experience, they absorbed knowledge critical for survival. Mistakes were instructive, reinforcing lessons with immediacy and consequence. By midwinter, children was adept at fire management as some adults, understanding that every ember and every breath of heat mattered. Meals were frugal and meticulously rationed. Thick porridge, occasionally supplemented with dried or salted meat, provided energy for the labor required to maintain warmth and care for animals. Every bite was carefully measured. Overconsumption risked depletion of scarce resources, while underconsumption threatened physical strength. Families had learned to ration strategically. Children often received slightly more to ensure energy for learning and movement, while adults moderated their intake to stretch supplies further. Every meal was a calculated act of survival. The village outside remained a frozen expanse, filled with dangers hidden beneath the snow and ice. Rivers were treacherous. Snowdrifts concealed hazards, and wind carried the potential for frostbite in moments of exposure. The villagers moved cautiously, reading the landscape like a living map. Changes in snow texture, animal tracks, and wind direction provided vital information, allowing them to navigate safely to fuel sources, water, and essential tasks. Experience was the key to survival. Those who understood the subtle cues of the frozen world moved with confidence, while the inexperienced risked injury or death. Smoke, while essential, was a constant irritant. Its acrid scent permeated the cottages, stinging eyes and thickening lungs over time. Families adapted by arranging hearths to channel smoke away from sleeping areas, using cloths to filter inhalation, and positioning benches to reduce exposure. Despite the discomfort, smoke was a lifeline, signaling warmth, sustenance, and life itself. Its presence was both comforting and necessary, a constant reminder that the household endured the deadly winter. Animals were tended with meticulous care. Cows, goats, sheep, and chickens provided not only food but also warmth and fuel. They were housed near cottages, their body heat contributing to ambient temperature. Feeding schedules were precise, ensuring no animal suffered from neglect, while also conserving the limited supply of food. Sick or weakened animals were treated promptly, as their loss could compromise heat, nutrition, and fuel. Livestock were not just property, they were integral to survival, and their care demanded continuous attention and skill. Every daily task was a negotiation with the cold. Steering embers, feeding animals, managing resources, and preparing meals required constant coordination. Adults divided labor efficiently, children assisted where possible, and routines became synchronized to conserve energy while maximizing survival. Households operated like well-oiled machines, each action affecting the safety and warmth of every member. This precision reflected generations of experience and adaptation to extreme winter conditions. Mental endurance was critical. The cold, hunger, and smoke created stress that could overwhelm even the strongest individuals. Families relied on ritualized routines, communal support, and coping strategies to maintain psychological stability. Humor, storytelling, and song provided temporary relief from the oppressive environment. reinforcing social bonds and offering moments of respite. Children absorb these lessons, learning to manage fear, discomfort, and fatigue through observation and imitation. Faith, superstition, and prayers provided additional psychological comfort, offering hope and structure in an otherwise unforgiving world. Innovation remained essential. Families experimented with small improvements, arranging peat blocks to optimize airflow, combining straw and dung to extend burn time, layering hides for insulation, and crafting vents to redirect smoke. Each successful adaptation was carefully observed, refined and incorporated into daily routines. Mistakes were instructive, teaching lessons that improved efficiency, safety, and warmth. Generational knowledge was embedded in every gesture, ensuring that survival strategies improved with experience.